Everyone has attended sometime or another a shiur, a lecture, heard a drasha, a devar Torah between Mincha and Marav perhaps, or heard a vort. I want you to take a few seconds while I pause to think about the last three divrei Torah you heard from any venue, a local shiur, an audio recording on the web, a talk given between Mincha and Marav, a talk on this past week's Shabbos table, the Bar Torah someone gave. Try to think about a particular Maggid Shiur who gave the talk. Can you recall anything substantive about it, other than, of course, the general topic discussed? Would you be able to say at least three substantive sentences that describe the essential ideas that were presented? What about some pratim, some details? Can you accurately repeat a story that perhaps was told? I assert that attending these events in which these divrei Torah or shiurim are given is a waste of time. As a professor of chinuch, of education, 40 years, and in all modesty, fairly reputable in my field, as a teacher for many, many years, I know how important it is to get your attention when you're giving a talk, especially at the beginning. So, although I can't see the expressions in your faces, I think I've succeeded in perking your interest about making that bold statement that these kinds of shiurim are a waste of time. But it's true. I mean, chaval al hazman. It's a shame that one can attend a drasha on Shabbos, attend a daf yomi shiur, or a chumash shiur, or listen to a vort, or some divrei Torah, and leave with literally nothing. It's not uncommon for someone to come home on Shabbos after Shacharis, and when the wife asks, what did the Rav talk about in his drasha? You pause, feign thinking, and then sheepishly respond, the Parsha? I have studied the subject for many years, attending numerous shiurim, observed hundreds of classrooms, kindergarten through grad school throughout North America and Israel. And it's all very similar. The teacher, the Rav, the Maggid Shiur talk, and everyone listens. Research says that most people, over 90%, are not auditory learners. Therefore, they're not likely to follow the often complicated intellectual maneuvers of a Maggid Shiur, even if one hands out Makomos, or even someone giving a vort between Mincha and Marav. What do most people leave with? Only an inkling, a periphery of the subject that was presented or investigated. So there are several questions. I'll just mention two. One, why then give such talks? And two, is there a better way? So I want to devote my remaining time with you to briefly answer these two questions. Before I do so, however, I want you to turn to someone sitting next to you, and we'll give you about 45 seconds to tell each other two things, or ask each other two things. One, what has been the major premise of my presentation thus far in these first 4 minutes I've been speaking? And two, what are the two questions I intend to answer in my remaining time with you? If you have any difficulty, simply turn to someone else and ask them to assist. If you're listening to this alone, then either out loud to yourself or jot down the responses to these ideas, these questions. One, what's been my major premise? And two, what are the two questions I intend to ask? Okay, you can also have easily press pause, but I'll continue. To answer, and by the way, if I did this while I was presenting, I would go around during those 45 seconds to kind of listen and provide situational assistance where people may be confused or missing or lacking information. But this was a fairly simple activity, but you'd be surprised how many could actually repeat the main premise and the two questions. So, to answer the first question, why give such talks? Simply, the one doing so intends to just lecture, to talk, to present his ideas, his chidushim, etc. The person does not intend his talk to be fully understood. He's not, of course, teaching. He's merely presenting. So many ask, what's the difference between presenting and teaching? So if I had time, I would, in the right forum, I'd ask you to brainstorm some ideas of differences between presenting and teaching. Let me just ask you initially another question. What's the most important question one must ask oneself about wanting to know about something, about anything, any term, concept, or idea? What's the most important thing to know? And the answer is, what is it? What is its definition? Because if you don't understand the definition of something, then you can't understand all its details and its complexities. So I will ask you now to think about the definition of the following word. Define the word teaching. Now, some of you may have come up with getting over information, teaching is the act of inspiring others, etc. I've asked this question to hundreds and hundreds of people, educators as well, and they all have very similar responses. Very few people are able to accurately define teaching, which is simply amazing, especially for educators, since presumably that's their profession. Well, getting over information is only the smallest part of teaching, and inspiring others is not a definition. Rather, it's a consequence that may occur if good teaching occurs. To save time, based upon extant research, teaching is a twofold process. One, it's an intentional process that encourages students to actively engage cognitively or otherwise with content. And two, and most critical, and here's the part where most people leave out, that the process ensures that learning has occurred through another process called assessment, or what I'll call CFU, checking for understanding. In other words, you're not engaged in the act of teaching unless you check that people who are listening to you, to your Devar Torah, have got it. And that you've checked for understanding, you've provided feedback, and you've allowed them to rehearse what they've taken away from your talk. Otherwise, you're just talking. You're just presenting. And educationally speaking, lecturing is the weakest form or way to promote learning for most groups of people, excluding those experts in the field who are surrounding themselves with another expert, with a top expert in the field, and these people are very, very knowledgeable about the subject matter. But for 98% of these situations, this type of non-teaching process is ineffective. Most shiurim, most divrei Torah that are given lack these two criteria. First, students or listeners are passive. They're not encouraged to actively be engaged with the content. And most people, especially adults, if you follow and understand adult learning theory, need such activity to learn. Most people are visual learners, not auditory learners. In order to learn most effectively, they need to be actively participating, AP, actively participating. Second, unless the one giving over the Torah, excuse the expression, giving over, checks for understanding, he or she has no idea whether or not, or the extent to which people walk away with the knowledge he or she intended to impart. Now, in defense of the Maggid Shir, he or she may not care, because teaching is not his purpose, then what is his purpose? Perhaps for people to be inspired by the dynamism of his talk. Ideally, now if that was the case, I would argue they would still need CFU, checking for understanding, because how would they know that they've inspired anyone? Or for people to walk away from their share saying, wow, look what Talmid Chacham he is. Look how smart he is. He can quote 4 different Gemaras with 3 different Tosfos, 3 Midrashim, etc., etc. Another reason I think we give such talks is we underestimate the intellectual capacity of our audience. We think perhaps they prefer to passively sit back or listen. And perhaps it's true. People have been conditioned by these inane shiurim where they just sit and listen and are never engaged by the Maggid Shiur to participate in a meaningful, continuous, ongoing way. Or simply that they simply wouldn't understand, and therefore why even bother engaging them, which just begs the question, why give the talk if not for your own benefit? My intent here is to encourage the whole world to change this approach to giving Divrei Torah. One more can be said. Now to my second question. What then to do? Now I might pause now, and I might ask you to pause the video and to review what would be some of the answers. And I gave at least 2 or 3 different answers to the first question. Why give such talks if it's true that most people are not Torah learners? I gave 2 or 3 different explanations. And if you were in my class, I would ask you to respond to me via email if we were not face-to-face, or I would certainly check for understanding if we were in a face-to-face situation. Okay. What then to do? At the very least, ask yourself, before you give a talk, what takeaway idea or ideas do I want people to walk away with? Sof ma'aseh b'machshava tchila. I've given talks to professors, non-education professors at various universities, and I mentioned to them that before they give a lesson or a lecture, they should always think about the end in mind. What do they want students to walk away from? What's their objectives they're trying to accomplish? And I'm so surprised that they think this is a chiddush. They say, wow, that's a great idea. I'm going to start doing that. But what have they been doing all this time? That's, of course, what you should be doing. Developing your objectives, what you want to accomplish, and then give them the information that's only necessary to accomplish that objective. And then, of course, to check for understanding, provide feedback to them, and then make sure they walk away with a proper understanding of what you intended to impart, meaning your objective. So, teach rather 1 or 2 ideas. There's a concentric circle notion in terms of content. The inner circle is the most essential critical information you want to impart. The second circle, the second layer, is what's good to know. And the third layer, the outer layer, is what's nice to know. I think if we have limited time with our audience, we need to focus on not the periphery, but rather the center. What ideas do we essentially want them to leave with, and teach to that center part of the concentric circle. So what are 2 ideas that you want them to walk away with? They can't be chedushim, but then review it with them. If you mention, for example, 5 steps or whatever, give them a mnemonic for them to remember the 5 steps. Shimon Tzaddik in Pirkei Avos says there are 3 things the world stands on, right? Torah, Avoda, Gemilas Chasadim. So if I was speaking to an English audience, I might say to them, TAG, T-A-G, Torah, Avoda, Gemilas Chasadim. I would rehearse it with them and make sure that when they leave, they would remember that Shimon Tzaddik said these 3 things are the things that the world stands upon. There are lots of things that a Maggid Shiur, that a presenter can do to present information in a clear or orderly way. So then the audience can rehearse it before they leave, and then they can come home and be able to perhaps repeat the vort or the story that you told. that might mean giving over less information and letting them walk away with the ikr, with the most important parts of your talk. This is a Maisa Shahaya, a true story. I was when I was in America driving past the toll booth. I tried to get to a place that I knew the address, but I didn't know how to get there. I stopped by a toll booth attendant, and I asked her how to get there, and she told me, and she said, take the third exit, make the second left and the third right, and then go about 2 miles and make another left. And I said, kind of like not really understanding her, but embarrassed, I asked her to repeat it. I said, thank you. And as I was about to pull away, she stopped me and said, do me a favor, please repeat what I said. Wow, what a teachable moment. And I repeated what she said. She corrected me. Then she asked me, despite the fact that people were honking behind me to move ahead, she said, repeat, and then I got it. This was a great example of someone who actually taught me something when, by just listening to what she said the first time, I did not chop, I did not get it. Now, don't be angry with me about all that I've said these past 16 minutes, because I didn't say this. Do you know who did? The Chafetz Chaim. That's right, the Chafetz Chaim. And I'll repeat what he said in Yiddish, and I'll translate for those who don't understand Yiddish. Als me hört a good word, but nachdem hört an anderes good word, bleibt mit gar nicht. If you hear the Var Torah, a good word, and then you hear another good word, and presumably nothing's done with that, you're left with nothing. Now, Chafetz Chaim didn't say, you're just getting inspired. He said, bleibt mit gar nicht. You're left with absolutely nothing. Now, I want to make another caveat. Chas v'shalom, am I saying that one should not attend a shiur, listen to a Devar Torah, attend the Daf Yomi. The reward is tremendous by just being oisek in Torah, by sitting there and listening to Torah. It's a great, undeniably. And those who get up 5 o'clock in the morning to go to Daf Yomi shiur, whenever they do it, and they're listening, and even though it's like information passing by, there's tremendous schar of doing that. But couldn't the schar be so much more greater if there was Havana? And what can we do as Magidei Shiur, presenters, to enable them and encourage our listeners to take something more substantive away from these talks and these shiurim? My point here is that we need to transform these potential learning events into teaching experiences. Without doing so, the Maggid Shiur, and I'm sure all of you listening to me have given a talk one time or another, may walk away saying to yourself, boy, I did a good job presenting. I was articulate. I think it was clear. After all, when I left, people gave me a shakoach. They shook my hand. But in reality, you have no hasaga. You have no idea what people are walking away with. They may be walking away with misapprehensions, misinformation. Unless you check for understanding, you have no idea. There's a simple assessment device called a minute paper. If it's not on Shabbos, you actually have them write down a piece of paper. What's the main idea? What are the ideas I spoke about in this lesson? And afterwards, without writing the names down, they give you the piece of paper. You'd be surprised what they walk away with. Those of you who have access to YouTube, I suggest you type in the 5-Minute University. And those who can't access the internet, let me tell you what the 5-Minute University is. It's kind of a spoof on what you remember 5 years after learning something. 5 years after taking a course in college, for example, economics, right? Even one course in economics, 15 weeks, 2 hours each time. And 5 years, when you ask what it's about, you say, supply and demand, which is the ikar idea. But do you remember anything more substantively? Of course not. And that really should encourage us to think about what we want people to walk away with, and what we want them to remember 5 years after we give the talk. And if they remember a little or nothing, then why bother them with all the details? Why not reinforce the center of the concentric circle analogy I gave earlier? So, What will you walk away from my talk here today, these past 20 minutes? Well, some of you may walk away thinking that I've been overly critical. Others, I hope, will contemplate some of the points I've tried to make. Although I've not fully put into practice all that I discussed, I did lead you into what one thing you could use is a pair and share. When I asked you earlier to pair and share to review my major point and the two questions, I would say, if you're getting a Devar Torah between Mincha and Marav and it's 8 minutes you have, talk for 5 minutes and spend 3 minutes pairing and sharing and giving feedback so they walk away with being able to repeat the story or the major ideas that you try to get across. And that's my point. And teaching is not presenting. When you're teaching, you facilitate an environment, you present the information in a coherent manner, and you CFU. Check for understanding, provide feedback so that students have learned. Without doing so, you're just talking. Thank you.